Let's take a look at creating this fake 3D augmented reality effect with 360-degree images in After Effects.
TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut and welcome to another After Effects tutorial. Today, as you can see, we're creating this 3D augmented reality effect where the artwork on the phone seems to dip into 3D space as if the phone were deeper than it actually is, but also extrude from that 3D space towards the camera as though a hologram above the phone. Now, this is just using some really simple tracking and 3D movement techniques, but the really cool thing about this is the spinning sunglasses, which is actually an asset that I got from Yellow Images, which is a perfect time to bring in the sponsor for this video. Yellow Images is a brilliant design resource website that offers object mockups, 360-degree images, creative fonts, and design assets, all at brilliant prices. Each item is manually reviewed and signed off by the team, so you know that only the best design assets are uploaded there. And I've managed to get you a 15% off discount just for the members of the TipTut Zone. For this tutorial, I'm using a 360-degree image of this pair of sunglasses, which had 144 angles to choose from. Brilliant. So use the link in the description and the discount code TipTut15 until the end of the year, that's 31st of December 2020, to get 15% off your subscription and purchases right now. Okay, so without any further ado, let's just jump right in. So we're going to recreate this tracked phone first. So the first thing you're going to need is your footage. Now, I have already imported my footage into After Effects, and I'm just going to create a new composition from it by right-clicking and just choosing New Comp from Selection. Now, what that does is pop our footage inside a composition for us, but we're going to, first of all, rename this Main, and we're going to pre-compose this again, but we're going to move all the attributes into the new composition, and we'll call it Footage. So inside that footage layer, we need to track the motion on our screen. And in order to get the best result, you need to mask out everything that isn't the screen. I did this step sloppily the first time and it came back to bite me. So it is definitely worth doing this, even though it takes a little bit of time. Basically, just create a mask that is slightly larger than your phone. Bring up the controls for that mask and keyframe the path so that when the phone moves, you just move the points of the path to stay roughly in shape with it. And what this is doing is cutting out any extra pieces of information that we don't need for the track. And it's stopping our camera tracker from getting too confused when we come to actually track the motion to apply the stuff to our screen later on. So I'm just going to fast forward through this bit, but I do recommend you do take your time and get this bit right. Okay, so as you can see now, I have my tracked footage with just a rectangle that roughly follows its form. Doesn't have to be super accurate, just has to be good enough. So now I'm going to press tab to bring up my mini flow composition flowchart and go back up to main. And as you can see here, we have our footage masked out. One thing is actually you might want to apply just a little bit of feather to this mask, just in case some of your tracking points move towards the edge. So we'll do that first. Then clicking on the footage composition, I'm going to turn off the audio for it because we don't need the audio. And I'm just going to go up to my tracker window and choose track camera. This is going to analyze it in the background for you. Just wait for it to be done. There's a little counter in the top left here, which is going to count through all the frames and track everything there for you. Okay, great. So once that is done, you're going to end up with all of these little X's all over your tracked footage section. And what you're looking for is essentially several points that do not disappear or reappear over time. So you can see that some of these are disappearing and reappearing around the edges here, but this is why we tracked specifically just the area of the phone because it makes this a bit easier. So I'm just going to draw a box around some in the middle that I can see don't disappear. And you should see a circle that looks like it's overlaying with the correct perspective on your phone. If it doesn't, just try retracking it again, but you should be good. Right click that and just choose Create Solid and Camera. And that's going to create a solid shape for you, which is tracked to your phone and oriented correctly. So you can see that's already following the phone footage there. And that's the most difficult part done. Go back inside your footage, go to your mask layer and just change it from add mode to none so that you get the rest of your footage back. And back in your main composition, you should see the rest of your stuff here. Now, you might need to rotate or orient your solid a little bit. So we're just going to do that by bringing up the rotation properties here and just orienting the correct angle until it lines up with the edges of our phone a bit better, which is there, quite nice. And then holding shift so it scales in proportion, which is quite important. We're going to scale it up until it covers our phone completely. You might find this easier if you reduce the opacity of your solid down a little bit so you can see through it. But I'm literally just going to cover it up just so it's ever so slightly larger, perhaps just meeting the edge of the phone there. You don't want it to be too much bigger. Now, with the opacity still lowered, we're just going to mask out this phone screen, and we're going to go a little bit larger than where the phone screen actually is, because you want to make sure you're covering up all the edges. So I'm just going to go into full quality mode, and you'll notice that even if you hold shift, it will follow the angles of your oriented footage. So holding shift doesn't go directly left, up, down, or right like it normally would. It follows the axes of your 3D layer, which is fantastically useful. And it's just a case of going around. If your phone has round corners or a notch or things like that, just make sure to incorporate that if you want to. And when you close up your mask, you'll be left with a perfectly tracked solid onto your masked phone. So you can scrub through now, and we have this solid perfectly tracked. If there are any bits which peek out momentarily, you might just go through and keyframe the mask. Like here, for example, I can see the edge of the phone. So I could just go back to my pen tool, select some of these frames, and just tweak them out a little bit. You could keyframe that if you need to, or you could just adjust it for the entirety, depending on how that might look. I think that looks fine, so we're just going to leave it like that for the tutorial. Okay, great. So we are going to rename this, first of all, tracked matte, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a matte that we're going to use. And we will now start working on the contents for inside of our screen. So right-click this and just choose pre-compose, but you want to leave all the attributes where they are this time, and we'll make sure that it's just called tracked matte. We do that because later on we're going to add some content inside of this. We're going to duplicate this now. Actually, let's not duplicate. Let's do it the proper way rather than the quick way that I've been doing, because I've made this a lot of times. First of all, let's make a new folder, call it assets. Make a new folder, call it sub comps, which is what I put all of my comps apart from the main into. And I'm just going to pop footage and tracked matte inside that sub comps folder. And I'll put my example inside my assets there, like so. So now we're going to need a background. So let's start working on our background. Now, if we check the example that we've got here going on, you'll notice that we have a few things happening, but we've got the same thing going on here. We have our footage, we have our screen tracker solid, and we have a composition that is called screen background below it, where all of our content is taking place. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to my main composition here. Now, I've done something slightly different, which is pre-compose that solid, but it doesn't really matter because we left all the attributes in the same place. So I'm going to go to layer new composition. Oh, sorry, not layer new composition. I'm just going to add a new composition down here. God, don't know where that came from. And we'll make it the same size as my phone screen, which I know is 1080 by 2280. And we'll call this phone background tut for tutorial, obviously. I'm not going to make it 60 frames a second. I'm going to make it 25, which is the same frame rate as my footage, and just hit OK. And that gives us this background here to work with. So in here, we're going to add our content. Okay, but first of all, I'm just going to add a nice bright solid with Control Y that fits the correct size of the background, just so we can see what we're doing. Going back to our main footage here, I'm going to pop this in the subcomps folder, grab phone background tut and drag it below my tracked matte. Now, these next steps, the order in which you do them are very important. You're going to pick whip your phone background to your track matte layer and then turn it 3D, because as you can see, that then changes it and attaches it to the phone correctly using the coordinates of your track matte. If you do that in the other way, for example, add your footage, make it 3D, pick whip it to your layer, it's going to position it, yes, angled correctly, but way out of the way. It's not going to take those position coordinates, although you can see how we might be doing some of the other stuff later on. So once more, the correct way, drag it in, pick whip it, 3D layer, and it will move it to the correct place. Again, you might need to just rotate like we did before, because we had to rotate the track matte, but I'm just going to eyeball it up, position it in the middle of my phone, and just scale it up until it starts to just peek out the edges, just so we've got a little bit. So you can probably guess what it is we're going to be doing next, and that is tracking our background footage here to our tracked matte by just switching the mode and choosing alpha matte tracked matte, which means it'll only show that footage where there is content on the tracked matte. Now we can go back inside here and we can start adding in our compositions. So I'm going to go to XD, which is where I've created my user interface. But again, you can just bring in whatever you want here. I'm going to select it, just choose export for After Effects. And that brings in a whole bunch of shape layers straight away, ready to go. It also creates a composition for you, which I'll pop in subcomps, and an assets folder, which I will obviously rename because we always label our layers. Shop Home Assets. Now, inside here, you can do whatever you want, But the key thing that we have here is our 3D animations. So to do so, you're going to need to hit P on all of your layers and just bring up the 3D controls by checking the 3D box. Now, every single layer here is now a 3D layer, okay? Which means we can push it backwards and forwards in Z space, and that Z space will be respected in our parent compositions. So I'm going to change it to 2 views down here in my window and make sure this left view is on top. And then I'm just going to go through, and I've already done this to save a lot of time, but I'll show you some examples of what I did. I'm just going to go through, select my layers like this background red layer here, and just push it backwards in Z space. So the larger the number, the further away from the camera, and it's just going to keep going backwards and backwards. So I might put the gray background at 1000, for example. You'll notice that makes it smaller, but because they're shape layers, we can just, we can just scale these back up so that they fill the screen again. And you'll want to make them slightly bigger than the screen because where you're changing the angle, you might see the edge of it just poking out, and that's not very good. So say, for example, you push something back in Z space, you scale it up, and then you just reposition it to be the correct size that you want. So, I've pushed that back to 500. So I'm going to need to definitely scale this up again and just tweak it until you get it correctly in position. Now, as you can see, this is going to probably take quite a long time. So what I'm going to do is just use one of my files from my example here, which is screen background, where I've already finished setting all of this stuff up. Now, inside Shop Home, which you can see is the same file from the XD file here, all I've done is finished pushing all of those layers back in 3D space and scaling them, okay? And it's given us this complicated looking thing here. You can see why I kind of fast forwarded through that bit. In addition to that, I've also added a slight drop shadow to some of this content, like these background layers, for example, which is just a drop shadow effect to add these nice shadows between layers, okay? That's all I've done. So let's go back to our project and our main footage here. So we have our phone background, which we can go inside of the composition. And I'm just going to drag my Shop Home into that composition so that it fits perfectly. Okay. Now let's go back to our main composition. Bam. You can see that it's now inside of that phone and showing. But if we scrub through our footage here, you'll notice that it is not 3D. Now, if you don't want 3D, that's fine. All you've got here is a tracked footage tutorial. You can stop, you're good to go, okay? But we want 3D, that's the whole point. And we just spent ages doing that 3D. Now, it's very simple to fix this, okay? You just need to make sure that your layer is continuously rasterized, right? And all that means is you go back to your main composition, you check this little box here. Now, that doesn't look correct because we need to go back and continuously rasterize this layer inside as well. Oh dear. Yeah, there we go. It takes a second to update. And now you can see that all of our layers are being respected in 3D space, which you can see a bit more clearly if we go and click through and rotate through our footage from different angles. So for example, if I just pre-render this, you'll notice that as I turn the phone, all of our layers and our 3D depth layers are respected now. So once again, all I did was make a composition, make the layers 3D, push those layers back in 3D space, and check the continuously rasterize box here. Really simple, really easy. Now, that's the first step of this tutorial. The next step is to create all of the assets that come off of the screen, which is the most fun bit in my opinion. So just collapse the layers down so that we can see a little bit clearer. And I'm going to bring in now my other composition from Adobe XD, which is the shop overlay, import it in the same way, and you'd end up with something that looks a little bit like this. There we go. Took me a second to find it there. Sorry about that. Animated some shapes coming on and animated these things fading up. This is just done with simple position keyframes. So, I imagine people watching this tutorial have at least opened After Effects before. Just some simple position keyframes. And this doesn't even have 3D layers. It's just a flat composition. So it's just a case of taking this composition here, dragging it in to your footage so it appears on top. I'll just move it along so we can see it in our timeline here. Remembering at first to pick whip this to your track matte layer before turning it 3D, which means then it is attached directly to the phone. Tweaking it into position here, like so. I'm going to change the anchor point of this one to the left-hand side, and I can do that by just selecting my pan behind tool and dragging it around, or I just have a plugin that allows me to do it with a simple click. I'm just going to move that into position next to the phone, and we know that it's attached to the phones. As long as we don't move it in Z space, we only move it in X and Y space, we know that it's still going to be attached to the phone. And I'm just going to drag it up a little bit until I get the position that I want. Once I'm happy with that, I'll move it over so that it animates on, and we can see that it's tracked to our phone and moving around with it. One thing I like to do actually is if I press R to bring up my R keyframes, I can rotate this on the Y axis. By having it rotate in, it just gives it a little bit more interest. And if I just hit F9 on these keyframes and make them go from fast to slow, just get that little flick of motion as it rotates into position. Okay. And again, if you wanted to, like I did in the tutorial, you could duplicate this. I would select my keyframes and reposition the anchor point to the right-hand side, and then move it in Y space, not rotate it in Y space. And we'll just grab that and move it over. We now have it duplicated on the other side of the phone with the same keyframes. We might want to invert that from positive 112 to negative 112. And then that way they'll both rotate in the same manner. And we have those two bits of footage now tracked to our phone. So here comes the fun bit then, which I left for last just in case people didn't download the Yellow Images resources. I'm just going to import now a image sequence that I downloaded from Yellow Images, which is this selection of different angles of my sunglasses here. If I choose the first one in the sequence and just hit import, it will automatically import that as a composition, which is lovely, and also as an image sequence. Now I'm just going to delete the composition because we need to affect the frame rate of it anyway. And I'll just pop that inside my assets folder, inside images. Now, as you can see, I'm just going to select this footage, right click it and choose interpret, because at the moment it's 30 frames per second, which is way too fast. So I'm going to make it 15. And then I'm going to right click and pre-compose or new comp from selection. And we'll call this glasses spinning. And I'll just pop that in the subcomps folder. Okay. Now I'm going to take my glasses spinning. I'm going to go back up to my main composition here, and I'm just going to do the same thing I did with the shop overlay. I'm going to drag them in. I'm going to pick whip them to my tracked matte. I'm going to turn on 3D layers, and that's going to bring in a spinning set of glasses at 15 frames per second. You can see how so easy it is with this Yellow Images thing. It's incredible. So make sure you do go and check that out and use the TipTut 15 code for 15% off. I'm going to scale these up a little bit. Just move them into position along the X and Y axes, but also I'm going to push them forward in Z space a little bit as well, so they float above the camera. I'm then going to go to right click, time, enable time remapping. I'm going to alt click on the stopwatch and just type loop out like this, which is going to allow me to loop this pair of glasses over and over again, forever and ever, which is great. And you can see they're already tracked to my footage, which is fantastic. I want them to look a little bit nicer than that. So what we're going to do is after the 20% off bit pops up, we'll just animate the position and opacity just a little bit by bringing up those keyframes. We'll move these glasses along a bit, go back to the first, push them up in Y space and bring their opacity down to 0. And then we'll F9 those keyframes and drag, just drag this right handle over. And we'll get ourselves a nice fading in animation like so. So if we quickly take a look, that's pretty much everything you need to know about how to create this cool 3D augmented reality effect with spinning glasses on top, which is great. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. It's been a bit different to what I usually do. I've also tried to make it a little bit more high level because this is a technique that, high level people would be using, and less waffle on basics like, how to add keyframes and things like that. If you struggle to follow along, you probably need to use a bit more of a basic tutorial, and I have an intro to motion graphics series that you can watch on the channel, which will get you started with the basics of After Effects. So I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Please do check out the Yellow Images website and use the discount code. It helps out the channel as well, gets me a bit of revenue, which is great. Feeds me, basically. And also you get access to all this cool stuff. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time on TipTut. I'd like to say a massive thank you to my level 2 and above members: Unknown Ghosts, WN62, Anonymous, Mel M. Hoover, Maybe Sharma, Ralika M, Mun336, Ian Costello, Dushyant Sinj, and Devunsh Goel. Thank you so much, you guys. You're keeping the lights on here at TipTut, and if you'd like to become a member and find out how you can get exclusive perks such as discounts, access to the Discord, shoutouts at videos, and personal design and review feedback, please just click that join button below.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.